The sun dipped low over the Texas hill country, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. I sat on the tailgate of my rusted F-150, boots caked in red clay, and breathed in the first taste of true silence I'd had in a decade. Before me stretched 200 acres of wild scrub, ancient oaks, and a private, spring-fed lake that shimmered like a fallen piece of the sky. I had spent 15 years as a civil engineer in the city, living in a neighborhood where the grass had to be exactly 3 inches tall and the mailbox had to be a specific shade of Pueblo sand. I had been fined for having a bird feeder. That was too rustic, and once received a formal reprimand because my guests parked on the street for 4 hours. When my uncle, Silas, passed away and left me his worthless scrubland and his savings, I didn't hesitate. I sold the suburban prison, quit the firm, and bought the adjoining parcel of land that bordered his. Together, they formed the Crescent Moon Ranch. It was outside any municipal jurisdiction, outside any city limits, and most importantly, a mile past the boundary line of the Fairwood Estates Homeowners Association. Fairwood Estates was a nightmare of white picket fences and forced smiles. It was a high-end development that had sprung up 5 years ago, catering to people who wanted to live in the country without actually dealing with nature. As I sat there, a cloud of dust rose from the narrow gravel strip that cut through the eastern edge of my property. A black SUV roared past, kicking up rocks that pelted my fence line. Then another followed. Then a delivery truck. I frowned. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena who specialized in land rights, had warned me about this. The previous owner of your northern parcel, Old Man Henderson, was a pushover, she had told me during the closing. He let the Fairwood developers use that private access road because they promised him a kickback that never materialized. It's not a public easement, Arthur. It's a private farm road that happens to be the only paved-ish way into the back, half of their Phase 3 development. I looked at the map. To get to the main highway, the residents of Fairwood's elite wing had 2 choices: a 40-minute detour around the marshlands to the north, or a 3-minute straight shot through my ranch. The peace was broken 10 minutes later by a silver Lexus that screeched to a halt near my tailgate. Out stepped a man wearing a crisp polo shirt and a look of permanent offense. I recognized him from the local news, Marcus Thorne, the president of the Fairwood Estates HOA. "You the new owner?" Marcus asked, not bothering with a greeting. He looked at my muddy boots with visible disgust. "Arthur Vance," I said, staying seated. "And you are?" "Marcus Thorne. Listen, Vance, we need to talk about this road. It's a mess. The gravel is kicking up onto the Mercedes of our residents. We're going to need you to pave it by the end of the month. We've already voted on the specifications in our last board meeting." I blinked, genuinely confused. "Your board meeting? Marcus, this isn't Fairwood. This is my ranch. I don't care about your specifications." Marcus chuckled, a dry, condescending sound. "You don't understand. We have an implied easement. Everyone uses this road. It's the lifeblood of the estates. You're expected to maintain it to our standards since it serves our community. I'll have the paperwork sent over regarding the color of the asphalt we require. We prefer midnight slate." "Get off my land, Marcus," I said quietly. His smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "You're trespassing. This road is private property. It was never deeded to the county, and it was never sold to Fairwood. Now get in your car and leave before I call the sheriff." Marcus pointed a finger at me. "You'll regret being difficult. Mr. Vance, we have a lot of influence in this county. You're just a man in a shack. Don't forget that." The shack was a beautiful timber frame house I was building with my own hands, but I didn't correct him. I watched him drive away, his tires spitting gravel onto my pristine grass. Over the next week, the harassment began. I received fines in the mail from Fairwood, estates for visual blight because I had a tractor parked in my own field. I found notice of violation stickers on my perimeter fence. They were trying to treat my ranch as if it were part of their governed territory. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I returned from town to find a construction crew on my land. They were unloading pallets of midnight slate asphalt. "Who authorized this?" I shouted, jumping out of my truck. The foreman looked at a clipboard. "Mr. Thorne. Said it was an emergency repair for the community access route." "Stop," I said. "Now, or I'm calling the police and filing charges for trespassing and vandalism. While the foreman scrambled to call his office, Marcus pulled up in his Lexus. He looked smug. It's for the best, Arthur. It will raise your property value. You should be thanking us. I told you to stay off my land, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, controlled anger. And I told you we have an implied easement, Marcus retorted. The law favors the many over the one. This road is ours in every way that matters. He drove off, leaving the construction crew in a state of confusion. I didn't call the police. I called Elena. Do I have the right to fence my perimeter? I asked. As long as it's on your surveyed line, she replied. And Arthur? I checked the titles again. There is no easement. Not implied, not prescriptive, nothing. Henderson was just letting them use it out of the goodness of his heart, and they haven't been using it long enough to claim a right of way. What about a gate? It's your land, she said, a smile evident in her voice. You can put a brick wall there if you want. I didn't build a wall. I did something better. I spent the next 48 hours working. I hired a local contractor who hated the HOA as much as I did. We worked through the night. On Thursday morning, the elite wing of Fairwood Estates woke up to a surprise. At the exact point where my property line met the edge of the Fairwood development, a massive heavy-duty cattle gate had been installed. It was anchored deep into the ground with reinforced concrete pillars. Next to it stood a large professional sign that read, Private Property, No Trespassing. Crescent Moon Ranch, road permanently closed to public traffic. But I didn't stop there. Just behind the gate, I had the contractor use a backhoe to dig a 6-foot-deep trench across the entirety of the road. I filled it with water and turned it into a decorative koi pond. On the other side of the pond, I planted a row of thick, thorny cedar trees. Around 7:30 a.m., the commuters arrived. A line of luxury cars began to stack up. Horns honked. People got out of their cars, dressed in expensive suits, staring in horror at the trench. I was sitting on a lawn chair on my side of the gate, sipping a cup of coffee. Marcus Thorne's Lexus screamed to the front of the line. He jumped out, his face a shade of red that matched the sunrise. He ran up to the gate and shook the bars. Vance, open this gate. People have to get to work. You're blocking the only exit for 300 families. I stood up and walked slowly to the gate. Good morning, Marcus. Beautiful day, isn't it? Open this gate right now. This is illegal. Actually, I said, leaning against the post. I consulted with my attorney and the county surveyor. This is my land. The road you've been using is actually a private driveway. And since you were so concerned about the visual blight of my tractor, I decided to do some landscaping. Do you like the pond? I'm thinking of adding a fountain. You can't do this! A woman shouted from behind Marcus. My kids are going to be late for private school. It takes 40 minutes to go the long way. I suggest you start driving then, I said politely. It's a lovely drive through the marsh. Lots of nature. Marcus was screaming into his phone, presumably calling the sheriff. I just sat back down. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Miller arrived. He was an old-school lawman who had dealt with Marcus's complaints about loud crickets and unauthorized sunflowers for years. He got out of his cruiser, looked at the gate, looked at the pond, and then looked at Marcus. Sheriff, arrest him, Marcus demanded. He's kidnapping an entire neighborhood. Sheriff Miller walked over to me. Morning, Arthur. Morning, Sheriff. Want some coffee? I'm good. Now, Marcus here says you're blocking a public road. It's not a public road, Sheriff, I said, handing him a folder of laminated documents Elena had prepared. Here is the survey, the deed, and a signed affidavit from the county clerk confirming there are no easements on this property. I've also filed a formal notice of closure with the county 2 days ago. The sheriff spent 10 minutes reading the papers. The crowd of wealthy homeowners grew larger, their voices rising in a chorus of indignation. Finally, the sheriff handed the folder back to me. He turned to the crowd. Folks, I'm afraid Mr. Vance is within his rights. This is private property. You've all been trespassing for years, and he's decided he doesn't want you on his porch anymore. You're going to have to turn around and use the north bypass. But that road is under construction, Marcus wailed. It'll take an hour. The sheriff shrugged. Better get moving then. And Marcus, if I see one of your people trying to cut this lock or drive through his field, I'll be the one doing the arresting for felony trespassing and destruction of property. The look of pure, impotent rage on Marcus's face was more satisfying than any paycheck I'd ever earned. One by one, the expensive cars were forced to perform awkward three-point turns and retreat back into the confines of their manicured prison. Over the next month, the HOA tried everything. They sued me. They tried to bribe me. They even tried to get the county to exercise eminent domain. But Elena was a shark. She pointed out that the HOA had plenty of land to build their own exit road. It would just cost them $3 million to bridge the wetlands. The county not wanting to spend taxpayer money to help a private developer who had cut corners sided with me. The elite wing wasn't so elite anymore. Property values dropped as word got out that the commute was a nightmare. People started moving out. The HOA board was ousted in a coup, and Marcus Thorne moved away in disgrace after his own neighbors turned on him. I, however, found a new rhythm. I finished my house. The wood smelled of cedar and pine. I spent my afternoons fishing on the lake, watching the herons hunt in the shallows. Without the constant roar of SUVs, the wildlife returned. I saw deer, foxes, and once a bobcat prowling the edge of the woods. One evening, about 6 months after the great closing, I was sitting on my porch when I heard a soft knock at the gate. I walked down the path. It was a young couple, probably in their late 20s. They looked exhausted. "Mr. Vance?" the man asked. "We live in Fairwood. Or we did. We just sold our place." "Congratulations," I said. "We just wanted to thank you," the woman said. "We hated that HOA. They were bleeding us dry with fees. Your little stunt gave us the excuse we needed to finally leave. We bought a place 10 miles south. No HOA, just 5 acres and a dog." I smiled and unlocked the gate. "In that case, would you like to take the shortcut one last time?"